and I'll eventually, in the last few slides, talk about the relevance of many of these thoughts to technical education. And a lot of this presentation is designed in my mind for what I think of as a non-mainstream academic individual. For example, somebody who's not at university. So this is the person that I'm addressing this whole thought process to. So it's important to keep this in mind. And I start off with two examples. Both of them didn't study at IITs. Both of them actually failed making it to the IITs of their day. One is Ekalavya, who was rejected by Dronacharya when he went to learn archery from him, and Arjuna cleared the JEE of the day and was selected by Dronacharya. And Ekalavya was not rejected, but somehow managed to get access to knowledge, apparently just by commitment, and by a certain amount of discipline. So many more Ekalavyas possible in this country than Arjunas, because number of, very attractive, great institutions is very small. Another lesson, Srinivasa Ramanujan. There are no tutorials, no IITs, IIScs, whatever we talk about as exalted institutions. And Srinivasa Ramanujan gets his hands on S.L. Loni, the book on trigonometry, and solves all problems. Eventually goes to a library and gets this book by G.S. Carr, which is titled A Synopsis of Elementary Results from Applied and Pure Mathematics, and solves all problems there. Fails in all subjects, loses scholarship, struggles through a system, and eventually gets recognition because of the fact that there was a possibility of subjective evaluation. These are two things that I want you to keep in mind. These are two little stories, right? Taken from a completely different perspective, where somebody had this opportunity to be able to. This is something that remains in my mind as a teacher all the time. Right? It's not the best who passed the exams and one who gets 100 out of 100 that counts. There's always many people who miss this 100 out of 100. Because you can give 100 out of 100 to one student in the class. Majority of them get 60, and all these 60s really hide the Ramanujans and Ekalavyas. This is a thought that I always have. So this whole presentation is to abstract out certain concepts that I see in these two examples. What do we need to learn? Right? First of all, drives my whole thought process. I want to de-emphasize learning outcome evaluation, which is often in my mind the biggest problem. Right? It's kind of counterproductive to creativity. Access to knowledge, we need to create libraries. Right? And reading halls must really be ubiquitous. Actually, I started putting reading halls must be as ubiquitous as temples in Madras, but then I thought that might not be politically correct. Imagine that every street there is a temple. Imagine a reading hall at the end of every street. Right? Where people can come out and study. Can we create this in our institutions? Can we create in every hostel, every department, a place where students can come at any time of the day and read? Can we make rooms accessible throughout the day, more or less? Online is a completely different ball game. I'll skip it. This ambience of discipline, it's very easily possible to make it self-regulatory in setting up this whole framework of learning. If you go to a country like Germany, you find advices which are there at many places, suggestions. Right? So, for example, the police department in Munich has this very nice slogan which says, "Have fun without alcohol and drugs." Right? It's there in small font on every vehicle, and it's not told repeatedly, but it's a very nice, catchy slogan. Right? So that's what I mean. You have posted messages, the ones in emphasis. This is your library, each one of yours. Right? Kind of reminds a person that it belongs not just to me when I use it, but to everybody else too. Okay? And maybe something like focus and let focus, like live and let live. And have designed activities around these places for people who congregate there to learn. Okay? So can we do this? Again, I'll skip online resources because it's a completely different ballgame and I only have 15 minutes. Classroom delivery, right? So coming to the next thing which is very important, can we have a two-teacher model where there is a person who delivers the lectures and there's another person who gives feedback to that person on a day-to-day basis. So essentially there are two teachers, one teacher and one learner teacher. For example, in computer science, Professor Timothy Gonzalez, who was the director of IIT Mandi, recommended, actually tried to do this when he was our HOD. He tried to get two teachers to sit in a class, one person teaching, the other person listening and giving feedback, and This is often a theory and systems pair. In computer science, there are theoreticians and systems people, and it's a theory systems pair where, both of them can get better in both the areas by sitting in each other's lectures and give constructive feedback. Right? And this also forms a peer group, right, which would have its own value. Next one, which is extremely important in classroom delivery, is can we somehow ensure classrooms to actually move from teacher initiated to student initiated? Should a teacher go to class and say, okay, today we are going to be talking about, as opposed to at least once in a week, the student coming and saying, today I read this and I can't get this right, or I want to talk about it to class. Can we get there? So how does one create such a possibility? And programming assignments for computer science are one very nice way of evaluating effort and creativity and not necessarily performance in an examination. Right? So for example, give a hard programming exercise, right, which a student you will definitely, because you are the designer of the exercise, you know test cases where the program will not work, right, very likely. And then you see how much effort the student has put in, right, and reward that effort and commend that effort and evaluate the creativity of the person's ideas, rather than having an examination and asking questions and asking whether the person can actually figure out this is this particular technology or this particular programming paradigm and so on and so forth. So classroom delivery, ambience for learning. So these are two thoughts that we have just addressed. This is largely systemic, right? So this thought occurs to me all the time. So today we have at many institutions people who are very good teachers who are now made to feel that they are useless because they've been asked to do PhD, and they're competent teachers. Right? It's possible for them to evolve into better and better teachers. They can design curriculum. On the other hand, somehow this whole decision has been made that an academic should hold a PhD degree. Right? And today I see lots of people who come and ask, "Sir, can you give me a problem that I can solve so that I can get my PhD?" This is the wrong question to ask, and sadly we motivated this. And can we kind of delineate these? A researcher definitely is definitely a teacher. For example, as you can see, I have the gift of gab. I can stand here and talk. This comes simply from giving talks about very technical things. Right? So I believe that person who trains to do research can definitely teach, but the person who chooses to be a teacher doesn't have to innovate to prove that he or she is capable of innovation. So I think that teacher doesn't have to be a researcher. So when we design a system, an academic environment, should it not be that a person who wants to teach should have the freedom to just be a teacher and not have to write a PhD thesis, which is a completely different effort. So the cloud there says that the current system, I'm afraid, I may be wrong and I will be happy to be wrong, that results in widespread mediocrity. Get one person to do everything, it's very hard. Now, coming to something that's more concrete, research groups. So, this slide and these whole set of thoughts are motivated by the fact that today, if you look around Indian academia, you find small colleges holding IEEE sponsored workshops. And there are paper presentation sessions where students actually go out and come up with ideas, and we all evaluate them. Would it not be better to actually have team-based paper reading workshops? For example, I would, for computer science, pick up a topic like randomized algorithms, right? And put out 15 papers and have this as a presentation exercise for a student community. So even in our lab, in our research group, we follow this now. So we have a theme and we have a set of papers that are supposed to be read, and there's a time frame. It's a course, but the course is driven by the mentors and the students by frequent presentations. And there are a lot of very positive results out of this experience over the last year or so. We have publications at very competitive places, just out of the simple effort of putting out a theme as a group leader, a set of papers to be read. And of course, as group leaders, we choose papers which are very relevant. And the student community goes out, explores this, reads, makes presentations, and so on. And it's a very positive thing about creating an ambience of good competitive research. Research groups are also very nice. So research groups can be evaluated the success of a research group. For example, I've seen papers by authors from Princeton, and it's not the individual. I mean, the person puts on his page saying that at this particular conference, Princeton this year has 7 papers. It's not the individuals. This is very nice because people now work towards this whole unit having papers in that conference. Having papers in that conference is the best thing in that framework. Right? And then credits are shared internal to the group, right, as to who contributed what and so on and so forth by authorship, first authorship and so on and so forth. Today if you look at India, at many places there are single faculty members and as many research groups. I mean, there is a faculty member per lab, as opposed to what should happen, a lab should actually have many researchers associated with it. So this whole thing about research groups which we must somehow create at every place around our country. So now coming to the individual. As an individual to a researcher, these are probably the most important things that make a person a competitor. Come from here, the answer is no. I mean, it's incomplete information. So I would say the first thing that one should tell one's students, right, so would be to ensure that they know pretty much everything about the top people in that particular area. It doesn't take too much time, especially in today's well-connected world. And the next thing, the last bullet, is extremely important. As a researcher evolves, must know techniques. And often there is a confusion. People ask, should I read the conference paper or the journal paper? I think there is a simple rule which says that if it's a classical technique, again classical must be defined, but if it's a classical technique, then it's often from a standard textbook or a journal. This might just be a definition. If you can find something in a textbook or a journal, it's a classical technique. Right? If it's an evolving technique, and if you find, you will very likely find it only in conferences. Right? So this is something that every researcher must endeavor to know completely, and he must create this environment. Okay, so here is something that I would say researchers must do. Right? Doesn't matter if it's a PhD student or a faculty member. Must give frequent and detailed talks to a peer audience. I mean, I'm a theoretical computer scientist. I should go out and give talks about my area to people of my ilk, right? So people who understand the language that I speak. I should also give expository talks to, say, electrical engineering people, right? Or electronics people, so who would definitely understand some of the issues that I deal with. And I must also present an exposition of my ideas, thoughts, and how I have endeavored to push the frontier. And this I believe that every researcher must do, and this must be part of our whole process. I'd recommend George Colliers How to Solve It. I mean, it's not written. I would recommend every PhD student when he joins your institution, get a copy of this book. It's really about how to solve and how to teach mathematics, and there's so much learning in that for almost any branch of scientific pursuit. Right? It's not just to do with mathematics, if you just abstract out different things. Right? So, I put Colliers How to Solve It. Colliers says how to select problems which are meaningful. The book speaks at length about very relevant problems from very hard problems. What are the consequences of this whole thing about research groups and this thought process about helping individuals become researchers? Is that you have a competitive researcher at the end of it. By giving talks, you got learned and meaningful questions from an audience, which definitely enables collaboration. And the person himself or herself is a future research group leader, becomes a leader in the area, and as a consequence will definitely lead to publications. As you can see, I have never spoke the word publications so far up to this point. Clearly, publications are a consequence of all the industry that I spoke about in the previous slides. All the effort eventually leads to something that you can go out and put into black and white. I think that the order should be evaluated. I think the process is what leads to publications. Quick things about theoretical computer science. Our experience at IIT Madras, right, over the last 3 years, our group in theoretical computer science has grown from 3 faculty members to about 7 now. And what have we done? I'm sure there are people who are theoretical computer science researchers here. What have we done and what kind of courses have we put in? You're welcome to the theory webpage, which is called theory.cse.iitm.ac.in. You will see this whole flow there. These are the basic courses that undergraduate students do that all of us know, data structures and algorithms and formal language and automata theory. And the focus in these courses is on analysis techniques, right, and mathematical formalism. For computer science, this is bread and butter. Right? And then there is advanced material which is often taught to a PG class, which is on advanced data structures and algorithms, advanced theory of computation, and mathematical concepts in computer science. Here, the techniques that we have organized, the topics that we have organized are probabilistic methods, algorithm analysis, and here we explicitly focus on two things: correctness of algorithms and running time analysis of algorithms. All of this require different kinds of mathematical techniques which have been picked up hopefully in the earlier courses. Next level, we talk about, as you could think that I mentioned, we talk about hard problems in the previous. We talk about complexity classes. A popular one is the NP-complete class of NP-complete problems, and we expose them to have courses which are in advanced algorithms in areas like approximation algorithms, and those are the titles of the authors of popular books that you can just Google. And the focus here is in the cloud there. It's how do you design algorithms given that the problems are inherently believed to be very hard, and how do you prove impossibilities, right? How do you prove that these problems, no matter how clever you get, you cannot beat these bounds on performance? So that's the focus on these design. So there are all these kinds of courses on the probabilistic method, combinatorial constructions, and so on. Here is my summary, which was made before I put the theoretical computer science stuff. Academicians must not be risk averse. You must be willing to collaborate. You should be willing to make mistakes. We should be willing to make mistakes. We should be willing to collaborate. We should be willing to let our ideas be stolen and fight for it. Okay? We cannot, and I think this is a very Indian pursuit. Lots of people say, is it okay for me to talk about my idea? I've met people who ask this question. I would say, okay. I mean, there are ways of fighting for your idea. Right? So please go and talk about your idea. Do not be risk averse. Lots of people find it very hard to come up and talk about their thoughts for a variety of reasons. You must strive to be free of your fears and limitations. We must set up environments where learning and exploring knowledge is ubiquitous. Basically, academic research should somehow strive to make it a vibrant social activity, very much like Carnatic music or Hindustani music. That's a vibrant social activity in this country. So I wish. Yeah. Okay, so here is something about recognition. And it's kind of a lot of things that I put. You can crave for knowledge and then you become a legend, and then the legend is your recognition. The fact that legend becomes a recognition of you. That's the story of Ramanujan and Ekalavya. And knowledge is something that we create, we share and gather, and then we disseminate. And that's basically what I think is the pursuit of a researcher and a teacher. A little bit of theoretical computer science.